In the year 5000, Earth was no longer the blue planet that once carried life. It had turned into a silent stone, floating alone in the darkness. There were no oceans left, no forests, no wind brushing across its empty surface. Only memories buried deep beneath layers of dust and time. No one had spoken the name Earth in thousands of years. To most beings in the galaxy, it was just a myth, a story told to children about the first dreamers, the strange species who had once learned how to travel between stars and then mysteriously vanished. But somewhere, hidden in the emptiness of space, a small pulse of light began to blink. It was faint, almost invisible against the blackness, but it carried something powerful, a voice. It was human. That voice had been traveling for thousands of years, bouncing from one dying satellite to another, through broken stargates and forgotten systems. And then one day it reached a world that still listened. The signal said only 5 words. "We're coming home soon." Those 5 words spread like wildfire through the galaxy. Every network, every station, every ship began to repeat them. For many it was impossible. Humanity was gone. Their ruins had turned to dust before most modern species were even born. How could they be coming back? But deep inside, something about that message felt real. It carried a warmth that no machine could fake, a pulse, a heartbeat. For centuries, the galaxy had lived in order and peace, ruled by great councils and vast alliances. They called it the Great Harmony. To outsiders, it looked like perfection. No wars, no hunger, no chaos. But underneath that calm, fear had always existed. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the first ones, humans. The leaders gathered in secret, speaking in hushed voices. Some were afraid. Others were curious. And a few were angry. They didn't want old ghosts returning to disturb the balance they had built. One leader said quietly, "If they return, the people will remember who built everything we use today. They will remember who we erased." The others fell silent, because the truth, the one buried so deep that even history had forgotten it, was that the Great Harmony existed only because humanity had been removed. No one spoke of that. Not for 40,000 years. Then one day scanners picked up movement near the edge of the galaxy. It was a ship unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It didn't have engines, wings, or weapons. It was made of light, smooth, and silent, like a piece of the night sky itself had come alive. As it moved closer, even the laws of physics seemed to bend around it. Space rippled gently. Time slowed. The ship stopped outside the first inhabited world it reached, and a single being stepped out. It looked human, though not quite like the humans from the old images. Taller, calmer, eyes glowing faintly like they carried a reflection of stars inside them. They did not shout or threaten. They didn't demand control or recognition. They simply looked at the sky and whispered, "It's still beautiful." And then they spoke to the watching galaxy. "We left to learn what it means to exist. We return to see what remains of what we began." Those words spread everywhere. Across thousands of worlds, beings stopped their work to listen. Some laughed. Some cried. Some refused to believe. But those who could feel, the sensitive ones, the dreamers, knew in their hearts that something great was happening. People began searching old archives. They dug through ancient ruins, trying to find proof that humans had truly existed. And slowly, forgotten memories started to surface. In a hidden desert world, a farmer found a metal disc buried beneath the sand. When it was activated, a hologram appeared, showing an old human woman standing in front of a blue ocean, smiling as she said, "We will come back when we are ready." In another corner of the galaxy, a scholar found a fragment of a song, soft, emotional, in a language that had died out long ago. It was a lullaby sung by a human mother to her child. No one knew what the words meant, but the melody made even machines pause, as if something ancient inside them recognized it. Everywhere, little signs began to appear, as if the universe itself had been waiting for this moment. Still, not everyone was happy. The council that ruled the Great Harmony feared what the truth might bring. They began spreading messages saying the signal was fake, a trick, an old satellite repeating random data. They said, "Do not listen. Humans are gone. They never existed as you imagine." But the light in the sky told a different story. When the human ship moved again, it didn't go to a capital or a rich world. It went to a small planet at the edge of nowhere. It landed quietly on soft ground, where wildflowers grew between rocks. People from nearby systems came to watch, nervous but curious. They expected something grand, a show of power, maybe a speech or a miracle. But what they saw was simple. A few humans stepped down, touching the soil like they were greeting an old friend. One of them smiled and whispered, "It feels the same." That moment was not captured on cameras, but those who witnessed it said they felt something stir inside their hearts, a warmth they couldn't explain. As days passed, the returners, as people began calling them, didn't build empires. They didn't ask for control. They walked among ordinary people, listening, asking questions, touching life again. They visited small schools, farms, and homes. They smiled when they saw children laugh. They cried when they saw broken lands. And sometimes when the nights were quiet, they told stories of where they had been. They spoke of endless journeys through the space between galaxies, of learning from beings made of light, of watching stars born and die like waves on a shore. But most of all, they spoke of remembering. Everything in this galaxy, they said, started with a dream. We were the first to dream. We just forgot what that meant. Some people laughed at them. Dreams don't build worlds, they said. Power does, but the humans only smiled. Power fades, they said. Dreams don't. Soon, even those who mocked them found themselves thinking differently. There was something about these returners that couldn't be ignored. They didn't look younger, but they didn't age. They didn't eat, yet they never seemed weak. And when they spoke, the air itself felt alive. One night, a young boy asked one of them, "Where did you go all this time?" The human looked at the stars and replied softly, "We went where we needed to go to remember who we were. And now we've come back to remember who you are." The boy didn't understand, but he remembered the words for the rest of his life. Across the galaxy, the message spread faster than any war or prophecy. Something inside everyone began to wake up. They didn't know what it was, but it felt like hope, raw and pure. For the first time in ages, people started asking questions about their own pasts. Who were they before the harmony? Who built the machines they used? Who gave them language, thought, curiosity? The answers frightened their leaders. Because every trail led back to one truth: humans had never disappeared. They had been erased, and now they were returning. The world began to change quietly. Old ruins started to glow again. Forgotten systems came back online. Even stars that had gone dark flickered to life. It was as if the universe had been waiting for this moment, to breathe again. But for the humans, it wasn't about power or revenge. It was about connection. They moved among people gently, reminding them of forgotten values: empathy, unity, love. They said, "You don't need to worship us. You just need to remember what it means to feel alive." And in that moment, it was clear. They hadn't returned as conquerors. They had returned as reminders. Somewhere in the distance, the faint glow of Earth, old, broken, and cold, reflected in their eyes. One of them looked toward it and whispered quietly to the others, "Let's go home." The others nodded. As their ship lifted from the small planet and disappeared into the stars, millions watched. And though no one spoke, everyone felt the same strange feeling deep inside their hearts. A pull, like a memory just beginning to return. The universe had been sleeping for a long, long time. But now the dreamers were awake again, and everything was about to change. The news of humanity's return spread faster than light itself. Every world, every civilization, every small village among the stars was talking about them. For some, it was a moment of hope. For others, it was fear. Because if humans had truly come back, then everything everyone believed for thousands of years might be a lie. Across the galaxy, governments and leaders held emergency meetings. The Council of the Great Harmony, the powerful alliance that had ruled for generations, sat in a tall glass tower floating above a bright blue gas planet. Inside that tower, leaders argued for hours. One said, "If they truly returned, the people will turn to them. We will lose control." Another replied, "No one has proof they are human. Maybe it's a trick. Maybe someone wants to shake our peace." But the oldest member of the council sat quietly, his hands folded. His voice trembled as he said, "It's not a trick. I have seen the signs. They are back." The room went silent, because those who truly knew history, Those who had access to the deepest archives understood something the public did not. Humanity hadn't disappeared by accident. They had been removed, erased from memory by the very alliance that now called itself the Great Harmony. Centuries ago, humans had grown too powerful, too curious. They had discovered ways to bend space, to create energy from thought, to speak to stars as if they were alive. The other races grew afraid. So together, they sealed human knowledge, destroyed their records, and rewrote the story of their extinction. It was supposed to be forgotten forever, but now, with their return, that lie trembled like a thin wall before a coming storm. The first ship of the returners had already appeared. But soon others followed, glowing softly like falling stars scattered across different corners of the galaxy. They didn't come in armies or fleets. They came in silence, each one appearing where humanity had once left its mark. In the world of Eleron, old ruins started to hum again. Stones that had been dead for ages began to glow with faint blue light. Locals gathered around, afraid yet curious. When they touched those stones, visions appeared, memories of ancient humans, smiling, building, creating. On another world, an old tower that had once been a communication center began to send out messages on its own. It repeated a simple phrase. The dreamers have returned. People everywhere were confused. They didn't understand what was happening, but they felt something powerful in their hearts, something that couldn't be explained by science. And then, the second human ship arrived at the capital world of the Great Harmony itself. It came out of nowhere, no light, no sound. It didn't crash or land. It just appeared above the city sky as if it had always been there. The people stopped what they were doing and looked up. The air went still. Even machines paused. From the ship, a soft light spread across the clouds, and a single voice echoed through the minds of everyone below. We have come to see what you became. No threats. No weapons. Just that single peaceful message. The Council ordered their defense systems to activate, but every system failed. The weapons refused to work, not because they were destroyed, but because something in their programming changed. It was as if the machines themselves refused to harm the visitors. In that moment, every being who looked at the sky felt the same strange thing, a calmness, like the feeling of standing beside the ocean or listening to a heartbeat. The returners stepped out from the light and the city went silent. They didn't look strange or alien. They looked human, yet there was something timeless about them. Their skin shimmered faintly under the light. Their eyes reflected stars. They moved with a quiet grace that made time itself seem slower. One of them stepped forward and spoke softly. We remember this place. Once our children played under skies like this. Tell us, what has become of them? No one answered. Not the council, not the guards, not the thousands watching from the streets. Because deep inside they all knew they were those children. Their languages, their knowledge, their very DNA carried traces of humanity. But their leaders didn't want to admit that. They had spent centuries building power on top of lies. If the truth came out, everything would fall apart. So the council tried to turn the people against the returners. They released messages saying, these beings are not your ancestors. They are invaders trying to take control of your worlds, but people weren't listening anymore. Because when the returners walked among them, everything around them began to change. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in centuries opened. Broken machines started working again. Even the air felt different, alive. The people began to follow them, asking questions, touching their hands, feeling something real for the first time in their lives. The humans didn't speak about power or rule. They spoke about memory. They told stories of the first humans who had built worlds not with weapons but with ideas. They spoke of a time when the galaxy was free and full of wonder, before fear took over. One young worker asked quietly, "Why did you leave us?" The returner smiled sadly and said, "We didn't leave. We were sent away, but we never forgot you." The worker's eyes filled with tears. "Then why come back now?" The human looked up at the stars. "Because you forgot what it means to dream." That single sentence spread across the galaxy faster than any broadcast. Because you forgot what it means to dream. It was repeated everywhere, in marketplaces, in schools, in ships drifting between worlds. Some laughed at it. Some mocked it. But for many, those words woke something deep inside their hearts. Old songs were sung again. Art, which had been forbidden for centuries under the Harmony's rules of order, started appearing on walls. Children began drawing strange figures, humans with glowing eyes standing beneath blue skies. Something was changing. Something the council could no longer control. Soon, small rebellions started. Not violent ones, but peaceful acts of memory. People began visiting the ancient ruins that had been sealed off. They uncovered statues, writings, and symbols of humanity that had been hidden. They learned about Earth, the place where it all began. The more they learned, the more the illusion of the Great Harmony began to crumble. The council tried everything: propaganda, threats, lies, but truth had already taken root. Once people remembered, there was no going back. In a distant part of the galaxy, a historian uncovered a secret document. It revealed the truth. Long ago, the council's ancestors had united not to protect peace, but to erase humanity out of fear. They had rewritten time itself to remove them from history. That document spread like fire, and suddenly, millions knew the truth. The galaxy had been living a lie. Meanwhile, the returners continued their silent journey, visiting one world after another. They never stayed long. They came, they listened, they smiled, and they moved on. Their presence alone was enough to wake something inside every living being. They never asked to be followed, but people followed anyway. They never asked to be worshipped, but some began to see them as living symbols of truth. Everywhere they went, reality seemed to bend slightly, like the universe itself remembered them. And in the quiet moments, when no one was watching, the returners spoke among themselves. One of them said softly, "They still don't know what's coming." Another replied, "They will, when the illusion finally breaks." For now they were patient. They watched as the galaxy they once built rediscovered its own forgotten soul. But in the shadows, the leaders of the Great Harmony were growing desperate. They began planning something dark, a final attempt to hold on to power. They believed they could destroy the returners, once and for all. What they didn't know was that their greatest weapon was already crumbling, because the truth had already begun to spread through every heart, every mind, every star. The illusion was weakening, and the more people remembered who they truly were, the faster the illusion began to fall apart. As one of the returners stood before a sleeping world, looking down at its oceans of light, they whispered quietly to the wind, "We came not to fight, but to remind them of themselves. The rest will unfold on its own." Far above them, a storm of light passed through the stars, a sign that reality itself was beginning to tremble. The returners looked at one another and nodded. The time of awakening had begun. The galaxy had grown quiet after the returners appeared. For the first time in thousands of years, people were no longer rushing toward progress. Instead, they were pausing, listening, wondering. Every being, no matter how different, felt that something had shifted in the air. It was like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were in. The leaders of the Great Harmony called it a disruption, but the common people called it something else. Awakening. Everywhere, small signs began to appear. Machines that had followed strict commands for generations suddenly began behaving strangely, as if they were thinking for themselves. Plants started growing in places where they hadn't survived before. Some even glowed faintly at night, reacting to the presence of the returners. No one could explain it, but everyone could feel it. The universe itself seemed to remember something long forgotten. On one distant planet, an old miner who had spent his whole life working underground came across a wall of strange symbols carved into the stone. He brushed away the dust and realized the symbols were human words. Somehow they had been there long before the mine even existed. The carvings read, "Truth cannot stay buried forever." The miner didn't know what it meant, but when he touched the stone, a wave of warmth ran through him. For the first time in his life, he felt calm. Stories like this began to spread across the stars. People started to believe that the returners weren't just visitors. They were unlocking something hidden deep inside every living soul. But while the people were feeling hope, the rulers of the Great Harmony were feeling fear. Their entire world was built on control, on order. They believed that if everyone started to remember the past, the fragile peace they created would fall apart. So, they began to act, quietly at first. They banned discussions about the returners in public. They sent secret agents to erase footage of their appearances. They even destroyed the ruins that glowed with human symbols, claiming they were unstable or dangerous. But it was too late. You can destroy records. You can silence people. But you cannot erase what's already been awakened inside the heart. One night in the outer regions of the galaxy, a bright explosion lit up the sky. A group of scholars who had been studying ancient human texts were caught in it. The council claimed it was an accident, but everyone knew it wasn't. That moment became a turning point. People began to realize the truth. The leaders weren't trying to protect peace, they were trying to protect a lie. And so whispers started spreading through the worlds. Whispers of rebellion, not one born of violence but of truth. People began to gather in secret places, sharing the stories of the returners, remembering the songs, the words, the feelings that had been lost for so long. They didn't call it war, they called it remembrance. Meanwhile, the returners continued their quiet journey. They didn't interfere with politics or power. They moved silently, almost invisibly, visiting worlds where people were still kind, still curious, still able to feel. They walked among the poor, the forgotten, the lost. They didn't bring wealth or weapons, they brought light. A touch, a glance, a few soft words that could change the way someone saw life. A child once asked one of them, "Why don't you stop the bad people? You have power, don't you?" The returner smiled gently and said, "If we fight their lies with more control, we become them." The truth must rise from within, not be forced upon the world. And that was what made them different. They weren't saviors or conquerors. They were reminders, echoes of what humanity once was, but not everyone understood this calm approach. Among the awakened, there were some who were impatient. They wanted to tear down the great harmony right away. They started calling themselves the Rememberers, and they began to act on their own. They hacked into the harmony's communication lines and spread old human recordings, music, poetry, stories. They filled the airwaves with forgotten voices, with words that spoke of love, unity, and courage. People listened and cried. It was as if their souls recognized those words even if they didn't fully understand them. The leaders panicked. They ordered their guards to find and silence the Rememberers. But every time they destroyed one group, another appeared elsewhere. It was unstoppable. The illusion of control was cracking piece by piece. Then something even stranger happened. The stars themselves began to flicker, not just from distance or dust, but in patterns like pulses. Scientists from across the galaxy tried to study it, but they couldn't explain it. The flickering was rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. And every time it happened, more and more people began to see flashes in their minds, memories that weren't theirs. Some saw oceans and green forests. Others saw cities of glass and steel under a blue sky. A few even heard voices, laughter, music, children playing. No one understood what was happening. But the returners did. They knew that the illusion, the false reality created long ago to hide humanity's erasure, was starting to weaken. They didn't celebrate. They simply watched quietly. Because when truth begins to surface, it doesn't come peacefully. It shakes everything. On one world, a massive library suddenly collapsed without any clear reason. When rescuers went through the ruins, they found a strange energy field surrounding the lower levels. Inside that field were books untouched, glowing faintly. When opened, they contained records of the real human history, the truth that had been erased. Those who read the pages wept. Because the truth was both beautiful and terrible. It told of how humans had once loved deeply, created wonders, but also how they had been betrayed. The Great Harmony wasn't built to save peace, it was built to bury guilt. The Council had known. Their ancestors had destroyed human civilization not out of hatred but out of fear. They feared the limitless potential humans carried, the power to shape reality itself with consciousness. So they built a new order. They rewrote time. They made every species believe that humanity had simply burned itself out, leaving nothing behind. But now, the cracks were too wide to hide. Worlds that had been peaceful for centuries began to experience strange tremors. Time itself began to behave differently, days lasting minutes, nights stretching endlessly. It was as if the universe was correcting itself, removing the layers of false history that had been built. Some called it chaos. Others called it rebirth and the returners. They called it truth's light. One of them stood before a mountain-sized crystal on a faraway planet. Inside that crystal was stored the entire history of the Great Harmony, the lies, the edits, the erased memories. The returner placed a hand on it and whispered softly, "It's time to wake up." The crystal cracked. A wave of golden light spread across the galaxy, and for the first time everyone saw visions of what had been hidden from them. They saw Earth, the birthplace of life. They saw humans walking hand in hand with others, not as rulers but as dreamers. They saw love, laughter, mistakes, forgiveness. They saw that everything they were now, their science, their art, their language, had come from those first dreamers. The great harmony fell into panic. Their systems shut down. Their weapons failed. Their cities flickered in and out of existence. The illusion that held their power together was collapsing faster than they could control it. In one desperate act, they tried to send out a warning across the stars. The humans are destroying the galaxy. But even that message failed to spread, because by then people no longer believed in fear. They had seen too much truth to go back. The returners didn't need to fight. The galaxy itself was waking up for them, and as it did, something miraculous happened. For the first time in 40,000 years, the stars began to shine brighter. The colors of space changed slightly. Even the silence between worlds felt alive again. The illusion, the grand lie that had kept the galaxy asleep, was falling apart, piece by piece. Yet this was only the beginning, because once truth awakens, it cannot be stopped. The returners looked at one another quietly. One of them spoke. They're starting to remember. Soon the illusion will not hold. But what comes next? We'll test them all. The others nodded. Far away, on the edge of space, the faint glow of a forgotten sun, Earth's old star, flickered softly. Something was happening there too. And when it finally awakened, the entire galaxy would learn what it meant to live beyond illusion. The returners turned toward the light. Without a word, they began their journey home. The real story of humanity, and of the galaxy, was only just beginning. The galaxy had never been this silent before. The stars, which once shone with steady light, now pulsed faintly like they were breathing. Whole worlds stood still, their people staring at the sky, unsure whether what they saw was real or not. The illusion was falling apart. For thousands of years, the Great Harmony had controlled everything: laws, education, history, even what people believed about themselves. But now that order was crumbling like dry sand. Every lie that had been told was being peeled away, layer by layer. On the surface of a cold desert world called Lithera, a great archive stood, a city-sized building filled with records, books and memories of the galaxy's past. It had always been protected by the Council, locked away from the public. But now strange things were happening inside it. Machines were turning on by themselves. Old doors that hadn't opened for centuries slid apart. And deep underground, a room that had been sealed since the beginning of the harmony began to glow. A group of knowledge seekers entered the chamber, guided by a faint light that seemed to call to them. Inside, they found a massive sphere floating in the air, covered in symbols no one could understand. It was ancient, older than any known civilization. When they touched it, the room filled with a bright light, and a voice spoke, not from a machine, but from the air itself. "You were never alone. You were never the first." The voice sounded human. The seekers stood frozen, their hearts pounding. Images began to appear around them. Holograms of Earth, oceans, cities, faces of people long gone. They saw humans laughing, building, dreaming. They saw children running under blue skies, holding hands, and then they saw something else: darkness, fire, and betrayal. The holograms showed how the Great Harmony had begun. The Council's ancestors had gathered, afraid of human power. They had seen humanity evolving beyond limits, reaching for knowledge that could change everything. And instead of trusting them, they turned against them. The Council spread lies saying humans had destroyed themselves. They built false histories, erased real ones, and created a new world order. That was the truth. The seekers fell to their knees. For the first time, they realized that the galaxy they lived in was built upon guilt and deception. One of them whispered, "All this time we thought we were protecting peace, but we were only protecting a lie." The voice of the sphere spoke again, calm but filled with sorrow. The illusion was made to hide shame, but truth always returns. Word spread quickly. People began to see recordings of what had been found. Even though the Council tried to block the information, it was too late. Once the truth entered the network, it spread everywhere. Whole cities stopped functioning as people abandoned their work and gathered in public squares to listen to the recordings. They cried as they watched the real story of humanity unfold. They saw the moment when humans, after realizing they could no longer trust the council, had chosen to leave, not out of fear, but out of hope. They wanted to evolve beyond the limits of the physical world, to understand what lay beyond time and matter. The returners, the humans who had come back, were their descendants, the ones who had succeeded in that journey. When the people learned this, something shifted inside them. For generations, they had been told to obey, to follow, to never question. Now they felt free for the first time. But freedom comes with fear. Many began asking, what happens now? If the great harmony was a lie, what would take its place? The council was falling apart. Its members turned on each other, blaming, shouting, desperate to hold on to power. But the people no longer listened. They were too busy discovering who they really were. On every planet, old ruins began to awaken. Walls glowed with forgotten human writing. In some places, even the sky shimmered with images of Earth, like a memory replaying in the stars. And then something strange happened. Time itself began to behave differently. In some worlds, days stretched endlessly. In others, nights lasted only moments. People started seeing fragments of other lives, as if they were remembering other versions of themselves, versions that had lived in different timelines, in different realities. It was confusing, frightening, beautiful. The returners watched all this quietly. They knew this was not destruction, it was awakening. The galaxy wasn't breaking apart. It was remembering itself, but not everyone saw it that way. Some leaders, desperate to keep control, called the returners corruptors. They said the humans were playing with forces that would destroy reality. They gathered armies, old fleets that hadn't been used in centuries, and pointed their weapons toward the returners. But the weapons failed. Whenever they tried to fire, their ships would lose power. Their systems would freeze. It was as if the universe itself refused to obey their violence. One of the returners appeared before a great gathering of frightened leaders. They didn't come with guards or threats. They came alone, wrapped in a soft white light. Their voice was calm. "You do not understand," they said. "We didn't come to rule. We came to return what was taken. The truth cannot harm you unless you fight it." But the leaders didn't want to listen. They still believed they could control the people with fear. That was when the illusion began to completely unravel. Across the stars, entire cities started flickering between forms, what they were and what they had been before the illusion. People saw the world changing before their eyes. Buildings that had stood for centuries vanished, replaced by landscapes of light and energy. Every living being began to feel a strange vibration in their chest, like their hearts were beating with the same rhythm as the stars. The returners explained. The galaxy you know was built on a false foundation. The illusion was not just political, it was physical. Reality itself was reshaped to hide the truth. Now that the truth is surfacing, the illusion can no longer hold. For most, it was terrifying, but for some, it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. One young girl looked at the sky as the stars rippled and whispered, "It's like the universe is waking up." The returner smiled. "It is." Then came the great collapse, not of worlds but of lies. The great harmony, once proud and powerful, simply faded. Its leaders vanished, their cities turned into dust, but no one mourned them. Instead, people gathered under the new light, holding hands, crying, laughing, feeling alive in a way they never had before. They began to see that humanity had never been a race apart. Humanity was the seed of consciousness in every being. The returners revealed that all living things carried traces of the same spark, the spark that once burned on Earth. Every living soul in the galaxy was part of that same story. When people heard this, they no longer saw the returners as gods. They saw them as family, as reflections of what they could become. The returner said softly, "You were never our enemies. You are us and we are you." Their words spread across space, carried by light and memory. Even the winds on distant planets seemed to whisper them. For the first time in thousands of years, there were no rulers, no fear, no division. The galaxy stood on the edge of something new, a truth that was bigger than any single world or species. Yet deep within the remains of the old harmony, a few survivors plotted quietly. They still couldn't accept that everything they believed in was a lie. They thought the returners were too powerful, too different. They whispered to each other, "If this continues, everything will dissolve. Even time will lose meaning." They didn't understand that this was the point. The illusion of control had to end for real freedom to begin. The returners knew this final resistance would come. They didn't try to stop it. They only said, let them see for themselves. The truth will reveal what is real and what is not. And as the last walls of illusion broke apart, something incredible happened. Far away, where Earth's sun once shone, a light appeared, a soft golden glow in the blackness. Slowly it grew brighter, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. The returners turned toward it. They smiled. It's waking, one whispered. The light grew until it covered the entire sky. Every being in the galaxy could see it. They didn't know what it was, but they felt it, deep inside, a pull, like home calling them. That light was the memory of Earth itself, returning, reborn, ready to show what had always been hidden. The illusion was gone. The truth was free. And for the first time since the beginning of time, the galaxy stood face to face with reality itself. The returners closed their eyes and whispered, now they will finally see. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. The golden light spread through the galaxy like a wave of warmth after a long, cold night. It reached every corner, from the smallest moon to the largest starship drifting in silence. For a moment, everything paused. It felt like time itself was holding its breath. People stepped outside their homes, their eyes wide with wonder. They could feel the light touching their skin, not burning, not blinding, but comforting, like a forgotten memory returning. Even machines began to hum softly, responding to the strange energy that flowed through everything. The returners stood quietly, watching. They knew what the others were feeling, because they had felt it too when they first awakened from the illusion long ago. It was the truth revealing itself, not as words or ideas, but as something that could be felt deep inside. A young boy on a distant planet reached out his hand toward the sky and whispered, "It feels like home." That simple word on home echoed across minds, hearts, and even through the vast emptiness between stars. For centuries, no one had known what home truly meant. Every world had become just another station in a long, endless system built on control. But now everyone could feel what had been missing: connection, belonging, and something real. The golden light began to shift. It formed shapes, first clouds, then oceans, mountains, and forests. It was showing them images of Earth, not the destroyed version the Council had told stories about, but a living world, breathing and beautiful. People saw waterfalls crashing into rivers glowing with light. They saw children running barefoot through meadows laughing. They saw families under clear skies, stars shining above them. The galaxy fell silent, watching a world that was supposed to be gone forever come alive again in front of their eyes. The Council's old servers, the machines that once spread propaganda, began to project the same images. Even the systems meant to censor information couldn't stop it. The truth had taken over everything. On one of the core worlds, a former leader of the Harmony sat alone in a dark chamber. The golden light seeped through the cracks of the walls and touched his face. He had built his life on order, on belief that control was safety. Now, watching the truth unfold, tears rolled down his cheeks. He whispered, "We thought we were protecting the galaxy, but we were only protecting ourselves from the truth." The walls around him started dissolving, turning into waves of light. He stood there as the illusion that had defined his entire life disappeared. Across the stars, the same thing was happening. Great cities made of glass and steel faded, revealing ancient landscapes hidden beneath. People who had lived their entire lives under artificial skies saw real starlight for the first time. But with this awakening came confusion. Many didn't understand what was happening. Some were afraid they were dying, while others thought it was the end of everything. But the returners knew better. They gathered on the great transmission networks, sending a message to all beings who could hear. Don't fear. What you see is not the end, it is the beginning. The illusion was created to hide your true world, and now it is returning. One returner explained gently, "You were never meant to live in separation. You were never meant to be ruled by fear. The truth is not coming from outside. It's awakening from within each of you." That message spread across the entire galaxy. For the first time, every world felt connected not by machines or laws, but by emotion, by something living. People began to feel memories that didn't belong to them, memories of places they had never been, lives they had never lived. A farmer on one world remembered walking by an ocean he had never seen. A pilot remembered flying through clouds made of real air, not the synthetic atmosphere of his city. They were remembering the collective past, fragments of humanity that had been erased. The returners told them, "These memories belong to all of you. They are pieces of who we all were before the illusion. They will help you remember what it means to be truly alive." As the light continued to spread, even the stars themselves began to pulse with rhythm, like the galaxy was singing. Some scientists tried to analyze it, to measure its frequency, but soon they realized it wasn't a signal in the traditional sense. It was life itself vibrating through creation. The more people opened their hearts, the stronger the light became. But not everyone could handle it. Some resisted, clinging to the old ways. A few surviving members of the Harmony gathered in secret, trying to rebuild the system. They feared that the truth would dissolve their power completely, and it did. Every time they tried to recreate control, the illusion collapsed instantly. They shouted, "This can't be real. We built this world. We gave it order." But their words no longer carried any weight. The people who once feared them now looked at them with pity, not anger. The spell of obedience had broken. Meanwhile, something extraordinary began happening at the center of the galaxy. The golden light concentrated into a spiral, a glowing gateway of energy. The returners said it was the source, the original heart of creation. The same energy that had given birth to both humans and stars. It pulsed slowly, as if waiting for someone to approach. The returners stood before it, and the people across the galaxy watched through the networks, their breath caught in their throats. One returner stepped closer, their face calm, eyes glowing softly. They spoke not just to the crowd, but to every soul watching. "We left to understand who we were. We returned to help you remember. But this is the real purpose, to reunite everything that was separated, to heal the wound of forgetting." As they spoke, the spiral of light began to respond, spinning faster. Streams of gold and white light reached out from it like arms, touching planets, moons, and suns. Wherever the light touched, people felt their hearts fill with warmth and understanding. They realized that the galaxy itself was alive. It had always been. Every atom, every breath, every dream had been part of one great consciousness, split apart long ago by fear. And now it was coming back together. Some fell to their knees, weeping. Others laughed uncontrollably, overwhelmed with joy. The returners simply closed their eyes, feeling the unity they had waited thousands of years to see. But in the midst of that beauty, a faint shadow appeared at the edge of the spiral, the last remnant of the illusion trying to survive. It whispered into the minds of the frightened, saying, "You will lose yourselves. You will disappear." Fear began to spread again, just for a moment. People hesitated, unsure whether to embrace the light or run from it. The galaxy trembled, caught between two realities. Then, an old woman from a forgotten world stepped forward. She had lived her whole life under the illusion. She raised her wrinkled hands to the sky and said softly, "If this is the truth, then I am ready to see it. Even if I disappear, at least I will disappear as myself." Her words broke the fear. All across the galaxy, others repeated her courage. "We are ready," they said. "We want to see the truth." And with that, the last shadow dissolved. The golden light filled everything. Stars, planets, hearts, even the emptiness between galaxies. The illusion shattered completely, leaving only what was real. The worlds that had been divided for millennia were now connected in a single network of living light. Every being could feel every other being. Not through speech or technology, but through feeling. They could sense each other's hopes, fears, and memories. It was as if the universe had turned into one vast heart, beating in harmony. The returners looked around them, tears in their eyes. "This," one whispered, "is what humanity was always meant to become." The galaxy wasn't gone. It had transformed. There were no more rulers, no more systems built on lies. Instead, there was truth, raw, infinite, and peaceful. The golden spiral at the center glowed brighter, forming a bridge of light that led beyond the stars. No one knew where it went. Some believed it led to the original Earth restored. Others thought it was a path to another level of existence. The returners smiled. "It doesn't matter where it leads," they said. "It only matters that now we can walk it together." And so, as the galaxy pulsed with new life, Countless beings took their first steps toward the unknown, not as separate races, not as rulers or servants, but as one. The illusion had fallen. The truth had returned. And the journey was not ending, and it was finally beginning. When the golden light finally settled across the galaxy, it was as if time itself had stopped running and begun to breathe again. Every star, every planet, every living being glowed with a soft shimmer, the last sign that the illusion had ended and the real universe had finally returned. There was peace, not the kind that comes from silence or rules, but a deeper peace, the kind that comes when people finally understand who they are. For the first time in countless years, no one was afraid. No one was hiding. The walls between species, worlds, and beliefs had fallen away. What remained was simple and pure: truth. But the truth was not what anyone expected. When the returners stood before the great spiral of light at the center of the galaxy, they finally saw what lay beyond it. It wasn't just another dimension or a lost world. It was memory itself. The light showed them the first breath of creation, when the universe had been one living being, one mind, one dream. Then came the Great Division, when the one became many, giving birth to stars, worlds, and souls. Humanity had been part of that first dream. They were never just a species of flesh and bone. They were fragments of that same consciousness scattered across time to experience, to grow, to learn love. The illusion, the great harmony, had been built to protect beings from this truth. The Council had feared that knowing everything was one might dissolve the structure of life. But what they didn't understand was that separation had already caused more pain than truth ever could. Now, with the illusion gone, everyone began to remember. People on distant planets closed their eyes and saw visions, not of destruction or war, but of beginnings. They saw themselves walking on ancient Earth, feeling the wind, touching the soil, hearing laughter. They saw families that weren't their own, but somehow still were. They saw faces they didn't recognize, yet their hearts knew them instantly. It was as if the universe was showing everyone that they had always been connected, always part of one great story that stretched far beyond the stars. The returners stepped forward, speaking softly so that every living being could hear them no matter where they were. You were never forgotten. You were never lost. Every moment you lived, every joy, every pain, was part of the great remembering. Their words echoed not through machines, but through hearts. A young child on a floating colony whispered to her mother, "I can feel everyone." Her mother smiled through tears. "Yes, we can all feel each other now." That was the true return, not just of humanity, but of unity itself. As the days passed, something miraculous began to happen. Where once there were barren wastelands, flowers began to bloom. Dead planets came alive again. The energy from the central light poured into the worlds, healing them from the inside out. The oceans turned blue again. Forests stretched their arms to the sky. The air shimmered with life. Even the stars began to sing, their light vibrating in soft harmonies that could be heard if one simply stood still and listened. The galaxy had become a living being again. And through it all, humanity, the returners and those who had awakened, began to change too. They didn't need ships to travel anymore. They could move through light. They didn't need machines to communicate. They could feel each other's thoughts as easily as they once spoke words. But even with this incredible transformation, there was no arrogance, no pride. The returners reminded everyone, this is not power. This is remembrance. You are not gods, you are home. Every being now carried the spark of the source inside them, and that spark was growing. One day, deep within the golden spiral, something began to form, a vision of Earth reborn. Not as it once was, but as it was always meant to be. The oceans were brighter, the sky deeper, the mountains alive with light. It was not a place of matter and stone, but of living memory and energy. The returners called it the New Earth. Slowly, people across the galaxy began to feel its call, a soft, gentle pull inside their hearts, like being invited home after a long journey. Those who were ready began to walk into the light. Their bodies dissolved, but their essence remained, glowing brighter as they stepped into the new world. They found themselves standing on familiar soil, under a sky full of stars they recognized from long ago. It wasn't a dream. It was the return of everything that had ever been real. There was no pain, no fear, no loss. Only the feeling of completeness, like finally remembering the song you were born to sing. Back in the physical worlds, those who remained behind didn't feel sorrow. They knew that the ones who had gone were not gone forever. The light connected all of them. Every heartbeat echoed through the same universe. And so, even though billions had crossed into the new Earth, the old worlds stayed alive, not as prisons, but as schools of experience. Places where souls could still grow, learn, and explore freely without illusion. The galaxy was now a garden of consciousness. Years passed, or maybe moments. Time no longer moved the way it once did. The returners still walked among the stars, guiding, teaching, reminding others to stay awake. They spoke often of the past, not with regret, but with gratitude. Without the illusion, one of them said, we would never have known what truth feels like. Darkness taught us to recognize light. People listened, understanding now that every part of the story, even the painful ones, had been necessary. Every mistake, every lie, every loss had pushed them closer to this awakening. In one corner of the galaxy, a young artist painted glowing murals on a crystal wall. When someone asked what the paintings meant, she smiled and said, "These are memories of a future that already happened." Her words made sense to everyone now. In this new reality, time was no longer a straight line. It was a circle, an eternal dance of beginnings and endings, all happening at once, and in the center of that circle, the source pulsed, the same light that had once appeared as Earth, now shining brighter than ever. Sometimes, people would gather in silence, watching it from afar. They didn't worship it. They simply felt it, and that was enough. One day, the returners stood before the spiral once more. They could feel it calling them home too. One of them looked at the others and said softly, "It's time. Our part of the story is complete." They stepped into the light together, smiling as they vanished into the glow. But their essence didn't disappear. It spread across the stars, becoming part of the rhythm that guided new life, new creation. Everywhere in the galaxy, new children were being born with golden eyes, a symbol of connection to the source. They carried the memories of everything that had come before, but they also carried something new, curiosity. They were the bridge between what had been and what was yet to come. And so, even as the story of the returners ended, the story of the galaxy continued, not with conflict or illusion, but with endless exploration of truth. The universe was free again, not ruled, not divided, not blind. Every world was alive with laughter and discovery. Music filled the air. Light shimmered across oceans. The stars were no longer silent. They hummed like gentle heartbeats in the distance. Some said the song of the stars was the voice of humanity itself, a reminder that even though they had once been lost, they had found their way home. And deep within the golden spiral, the source whispered one last message heard by every living soul. You were never separate. You were never less. You were always me, and I was always you. The message echoed through time, through light, through the very fabric of creation. It became a memory written into every heartbeat, every sunrise, every breath. No one feared death anymore. No one feared life either. Everything was one, changing, glowing, alive. And in the endless expanse of stars, where once there had been chaos and confusion, now there was harmony, real harmony, not the kind forced by fear, but the kind born from love and understanding. The galaxy had finally awakened. Humanity had finally remembered. And the greatest illusion of all, that they were ever separate, had fallen forever. The universe smiled within itself. The journey had come full circle. Home had returned.